"If you die, I'll follow," she whispered. "Mafia boss kissed her, then we'll live instead." The fluorescent lights of Havenport General Hospital hummed with a frequency that Emily Carter felt deep in her molars. It was a sound she associated with exhaustion, the kind that settled into the marrow of her bones after a 12-hour shift that had somehow stretched into 14. The air in the emergency room smelled of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of dried blood. Outside, the city of Havenport wept under a relentless downpour, the rain lashing against the sliding glass doors as if trying to wash away the grime of the streets. Emily stripped off her latex gloves, snapping the material with a sharp sound that barely registered over the chaotic symphony of the ER. Phones rang incessantly at the intake desk. A monitor beeped with a frantic, irregular rhythm in Bay 3. 2 orderlies were arguing over a gurney with a broken wheel. It was just another Tuesday night in a city that seemed determined to tear itself apart. She rubbed the back of her neck, wincing as a knot of tension flared at the base of her skull. She had spent the last hour trying to comfort a young mother whose son had been caught in the crossfire of a drive-by shooting 3 blocks away. He would live, but the look in the mother's eyes, that hollow, terrified realization that safety was an illusion, haunted Emily more than the wounds themselves. "You need to go home," Emily told herself. "You are running on fumes." She was halfway to the break room, dreaming of the lukewarm water in her water bottle, when the double doors of the ambulance bay burst open. The rush of wind brought the smell of rain and exhaust into the sterile hallway, followed immediately by the frantic shouting of paramedics. Male, roughly 30 years old, multiple gunshot wounds to the torso and left thigh. One paramedic yelled, pushing the gurney with a speed that spoke of desperation. "BP is dropping fast, 80 over 50. We are losing him." Emily spun around, her fatigue vanishing under the surge of adrenaline that every ER nurse knew intimately. She moved to intercept the gurney, her eyes scanning the patient instantly. He was unconscious, his face pale beneath a layer of sweat and grime. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, but before she could even reach for the trauma shears, she stopped short. It was not just paramedics surrounding the gurney. 4 men in immaculate, rain-slicked suits moved with the medical team, a phalanx of silent, terrifying efficiency. They did not look like concerned relatives. They moved like wolves circling a wounded alpha. They blocked the hallway, their eyes scanning every corner, every nurse, every shadow. "Get out of the way," Emily shouted, pushing past the largest of the men, a giant with a neck as thick as a tree trunk. "If you want him to live, you need to move. Now." The giant hesitated, but a man at the front of the group raised a hand. He was leaner, with sharp features and eyes that looked like shattered flint. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Emily made in a year, and despite the blood soaking the shirt of the man on the gurney, this man remained terrifyingly calm. "Let her work," the sharp-faced man said. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that made the giant step back instantly. Emily did not have time to process the dynamic. She helped steer the gurney into Trauma Bay 1, the curtains whipping closed behind them. The paramedics began rattling off vitals and drug dosages, but the men in suits forced their way into the room, lining the walls like silent sentinels. "I need everyone who is not medical staff out of this room," Emily ordered, grabbing a pair of shears to cut through the patient's soaked shirt. "No," the sharp-faced man said. He stood at the foot of the bed, his hands clasped in front of him. "We stay—" Emily glared at him, but her hands never stopped moving. She sliced through the expensive fabric of the patient's dress shirt, revealing a chest battered by violence. 3 bullet wounds, 2 in the abdomen, 1 grazing the ribs. The blood was dark and flowing too freely. "Suit yourself," she snapped. "But if you get in my way, I will have security throw you out." She worked with the practiced efficiency of a veteran. Pressure, packing, IV lines. The monitor screamed a warning as the patient's heart rate spiked and then plummeted. As she swabbed the blood away from his ribcage to assess the entry wound, her eyes caught the flash of ink against his pale skin. It was a tattoo, small and intricate, located just over his heart, a black lion holding a dagger in its teeth. encircled by a wreath of thorns. Emily froze for a fraction of a second. She knew that crest. Everyone in Havenport knew that crest, even if they only spoke of it in hushed whispers in the back of dive bars. It belonged to the Moretti family. Her gaze darted to the patient's hand. On his pinky finger sat a heavy silver ring bearing the same insignia. She looked at his face again, really looked at him this time. The sharp jawline, the heavy brows, the cruel mouth that was currently slack with unconsciousness. She'd seen his grainy picture on the news 6 months ago when a federal indictment had mysteriously fallen apart due to a lack of witnesses. This was Luca Moretti, the head of the Moretti crime family, the man who supposedly ran half the city from the shadows. A cold shiver went down her spine, entirely separate from the air conditioning. She was holding the life of a monster in her hands. The monitor beeped steadily now, the rhythm stabilizing as the fluids rushed into his system. Emily exhaled, pushing a stray lock of hair from her face with her shoulder. "He's stable for now," she announced, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "But he needs surgery immediately. I need to call the OR and get the police down here to log the—" "No police," the sharp-faced man interrupted. He stepped forward, invading her personal space. His name tag, if he had one, would likely read Nico Rossi. Emily recognized him now from the news reports as well. Luca Moretti's right hand, the executioner to Luca's judge. "Protocol requires us to report all gunshot wounds to the authorities," Emily said, meeting his gaze. "It is the law." Nico Rossi looked at her as if she were a child, suggesting they play a game of hopscotch in a minefield. "There will be no police report," Nico said smoothly. "There will be no record of Luca Moretti being here. You will treat him, you will save him, and we will leave." "I cannot do that," Emily said, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the phone on the wall. "The hospital security is already notifying the precinct. It is automatic." Nico moved faster than she expected. His hand covered hers on the receiver, preventing her from lifting it. He did not squeeze, but the threat was palpable. "Listen to me, nurse," Nico said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was far scarier than a shout. "If the police come, they arrest him. If they arrest him while he is weak, his enemies inside the prison system kill him before sunrise. And if he dies, the war that starts in this city will burn everything down, including this hospital." Emily stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. She looked back at the patient. Luca. He looked deceptively human lying there, vulnerable. Suddenly, the doors to the trauma bay swung open. "Everything okay in here?" It was intense. Officer Miller, the hospital's night security guard. He was a good man, nearing retirement with a paunch and a kind smile. He held his radio in one hand. I saw the commotion. "Dispatch is asking if we have a Jane or John Doe for the shooting downtown." The tension in the room spiked so high the air felt thin. Nico's hand tightened on the phone. The giant by the door shifted, his hand moving toward the inside of his jacket. Emily saw it. She saw the violence about to erupt. If Miller called it in, if he insisted, these men would not hesitate. Miller would be dead before he hit the floor, and her ER would turn into a slaughterhouse. She looked at Luca Moretti, then she looked at the evidence tray beside the bed. There, lying amidst the bloody gauze, was the bullet she had just extracted from his side, a distinctive, high-caliber slug that would immediately flag as part of a gang war. And next to it, his wallet, which had fallen out of his trousers, lying open to show his ID. She had a split second. "It is fine." "Miller," Emily called out, her voice cracking only slightly. She turned her body, shielding the tray from Miller's view. With a sleight of hand born of panic, she swept the bullet and the wallet into the pocket of her scrubs in one fluid motion. "It is not a gunshot." She lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Industrial accident. Rebar puncture. Looks worse than it is. No police needed." Miller blinked, looking from the intense men in suits back to Emily. He trusted her. She had baked cookies for his granddaughter's birthday. "Oh," he said. "Relaxing. All right. I will tell dispatch to keep the line clear. Let me know if you need help with these. Gentlemen?" He nodded and let the door swing shut. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily felt sick. She had just committed a felony. She had obstructed justice. She had protected a man who likely had enough blood on his hands to drown the city. Nico slowly removed his hand from the phone. He looked at her with a new expression. It was not warmth, but it was respect. "Smart choice," Nico said softly. Emily ignored him. She turned back to the patient, her hands shaking uncontrollably now. "I did not do it for you," she hissed. "I did it so you wouldn't kill the security guard." As she leaned over to adjust the oxygen mask, she felt a sudden grip on her wrist. She gasped and looked down. Luca Moretti's eyes were open. They were dark, almost black, clouded with pain and narcotics, yet terrifyingly lucid. He was looking right at her. He had heard the lie. He knew what she had done. His grip was weak, but his fingers were hot against her skin. He did not speak. He could not. Not with the oxygen mask and the trauma, but the look he gave her was searing. It was a mixture of agony, confusion, and a profound, silent curiosity. He was analyzing her, dissecting her motives. "Let go," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Luca held her gaze for 1 second longer, his thumb brushing against the frantic pulse in her wrist, before his eyes rolled back and his hand fell away as unconsciousness claimed him again. "Get him to surgery." Nico ordered the room, the spell breaking. 3 hours later, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy, humid mist that clung to the windows of the recovery wing. Emily stood in the doorway of room 402. Her shift had officially ended 2 hours ago. She should be home. She should be asleep, but her feet had carried her here against her will. The room was dark, save for the glow of the monitors. The hallway outside was empty of the usual hospital staff. Nico had evidently purchased their privacy, or at least their fear. 2 of the suited men stood guard outside the door, but they stepped aside for her without a word. She walked to the side of the bed. Luca Moretti was awake. He was propped up slightly, his chest heavily bandaged beneath the hospital gown. The IV lines snaked from his arms like tethers. He looked pale. The exhaustion etched deep into the circles under his eyes, but the dangerous aura she had sensed in the ER was back in full force. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable. "You are still here," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "I am checking your vitals," Emily said, keeping her tone professional, though she kept her distance. "I want to make sure you do not code on my watch. I have done enough illegal things for you tonight." Luca's lips quirked up at the corner, a ghost of a smile. "The nurse who lies to the police," he murmured. "Nico told me. You saved me from a cell. I saved my hospital from a shootout," Emily corrected him sharply. "Do not mistake my survival instinct for loyalty, Mr. Moretti." Luca studied her. He looked at her simple blue scrubs, her messy bun, the ID badge clipped to her pocket. "You know who I am," he stated. "Everyone knows who you are," Emily said. "Emily, you are the reason half my patients come in here bleeding. You are the reason this city is rotting from the inside out." It was a bold thing to say to a man who could have her disappeared with a phone call. She saw a flash of surprise in his eyes, followed by amusement. "You have a sharp tongue." "Nurse Carter," he said, reading her badge. "Most people tremble when they talk to me. I am too tired to tremble." Emily sighed, checking the readout on the monitor. "And I deal with blood and death every single day. You are just another trauma patient, except your suit costs more than my car." Luca chuckled, but the movement made him wince. He hissed a breath through his teeth, clutching his side. "Careful," Emily said instinctively, reaching out to adjust the pillow behind him. "You will tear your stitches." She froze when she realized how close she was. Her hand was behind his shoulder, her face inches from his. She could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering beneath the harsh hospital soap. He smelled like cedar and rain. Luca turned his head. His face was so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. The amusement was gone from his eyes, replaced by that intense, probing look she had seen in the ER. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "You hate what I am. I can see it in your eyes, so why hide the evidence?" Emily pulled back, retreating to the safety of the foot of the bed, because, she said, her voice wavering slightly, In my ER, the only thing that matters is keeping the heart beating. Once you are out those doors, you can go back to being a villain. But in here, you are just a man who was dying." Luca watched her for a long moment, the silence stretched, heavy and charged. "You are too brave for your own good." "Emily," he said softly, using her first name. "It is a dangerous quality." "I am not brave," Emily said, turning to the door. "I am just a nurse." "Goodbye, Mr. Moretti. Try not to get shot again." She walked out without looking back, but she could feel his eyes on her until the door clicked shut. Her apartment was small, cluttered, and blissfully silent. Emily sat on her second-hand beige sofa, staring at a bowl of instant ramen she had forgotten to eat. The noodles had gone cold and congealed. Her phone sat on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with a notification. It was a text from Jenna, her best friend and fellow nurse who had the night off. Jenna: "Saw the news. Shooting downtown. You okay? Heard it was crazy." Emily picked up the phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She typed out a response, then deleted it. She typed again. "Emily, I'm fine. Just a long night. I think I just patched up the devil himself." She hit send, then tossed the phone onto the cushion beside her. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around her legs. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, gnawing pit of anxiety in her stomach. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the items she had forgotten to dispose of. The heavy silver wallet, the spent shell casing. She stared at the wallet. She should throw it in the river. She should burn it. Inside, she found a stack of cash, thousands of dollars, and a single photograph tucked behind the driver's license. It was an old photo, worn at the edges, a young boy standing next to a stern-looking man, presumably his father. The boy looked happy, innocent. It was hard to reconcile that child with the man lying in the hospital bed. "I helped him," she whispered to the empty room. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her. By saving him, had she condemned others? How many people would suffer because Luca Moretti lived to see another day? But then she remembered his eyes, the way he had looked at her when he said she was too brave. There had been no malice in that look. There had been recognition, as if he saw something in her that he understood. She shoved the wallet and the casing into the bottom drawer of her coffee table, burying them under a stack of utility bills. "Just for tonight," she told herself. "I did my job. That is all." 3 days passed. The hospital returned to its normal level of chaos. The mysterious patient in room 402 had been discharged, or rather, had vanished, before sunrise the morning after his surgery. The nurses whispered about it, but no one asked questions. The administration seemed to have developed collective amnesia, likely aided by a generous donation that had appeared in the hospital's accounts. Emily tried to put it behind her. She focused on the flu outbreak, the car accidents, the broken bones. She told herself that her brush with the Mafia was a one-time anomaly. She was wrong. It was 3 a.m. when she finally walked out of the staff exit. The air was crisp, the rain having finally cleared to reveal a starry sky. She adjusted her tote bag on her shoulder, searching her purse for her car keys. She stopped. Sitting at the curb, directly in front of her rusted Honda Civic, was a sleek, black sedan. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like oil. It was a machine of pure power and wealth, utterly out of place in the employee parking lot. The back door opened. Nico Rossi stepped out. He was wearing a different suit, this one navy blue, but he looked just as dangerous as he had in the trauma bay. He did not look like a thug. He looked like a corporate executive who specialized in hostile takeovers of the lethal variety. "Miss Carter," Nico said, dipping his head slightly. Emily gripped her keys like a weapon, the jagged metal biting into her palm. "What do you want? I have nothing left to say to you or your boss." Nico walked around the car to open the rear passenger door. He gestured to the open interior. "Mr. Moretti requests your presence," Nico said. "I'm tired," Emily said, backing away. "I am going home. Tell him I said no." Nico offered a small, apologetic smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Moretti is not a man who accepts no as an answer. Miss Carter, especially not when he wishes to express his gratitude." Gratitude? Emily scoffed. I do not want his money. It is not about money, Nico said. He wants to thank you personally. And frankly, given the rumors starting to circulate about who treated him, it would be in your best interest to come with us. It is safer than standing here in the open. Emily froze. Rumors? Please, Nico said, his voice dropping to that polite, firm tone that brooked no argument. Do not make a scene. Just get in the car. It is a short drive. He just wants to talk. Emily looked around the empty parking lot. There was no one to help her. No security guard, just the humming of the streetlights. She looked at the open door of the black car. It looked like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. She realized with a sinking feeling that her life, her normal, boring, safe life, had ended the moment she cut that shirt open 3 nights ago. Fine, she whispered. She walked forward, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She slid into the leather back seat of the car. It smelled of cedar and rain. Nico closed the door, sealing her in. As the car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the night, Emily watched the hospital disappear in the rearview mirror, wondering if she would ever truly come back. The drive to the outskirts of Havenport was wrapped in a silence so thick it felt pressurized. Emily sat in the back of the black sedan, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from trembling. Outside the tinted windows, the city landscape shifted. The grimy brick facades and flickering neon signs of the hospital district gave way to wider avenues, manicured medians, and iron gates that guarded long, winding driveways. She knew this part of town existed, the Heights, but she had never had a reason to visit. This was where the city's old money lived, and apparently, where its blood money lived too. Nico Rossi drove with a terrifying calmness. He did not speed. He did not weave through traffic. He drove like a man who knew the road belonged to him. We are almost there, Nico said, his eyes meeting hers briefly in the rearview mirror. Emily did not answer. She was too busy trying to slow her heart rate. She had spent her entire career treating the victims of men like Luca Moretti. Now, she was being hand-delivered to his doorstep like a parcel. The car slowed, turning onto a private road lined with ancient oak trees. At the end of the lane, a massive wrought iron gate blocked the way. It swung open silently as they approached, revealing the Moretti estate. It was not just a house, it was a fortress disguised as a palace. The mansion was a sprawling structure of pale stone and dark slate, illuminated by tasteful floodlights that cast long, dramatic shadows across the immaculate gardens. Cameras blinked from the trees. Men in dark suits stood at the perimeter, blending into the night. It was beautiful, oppressive, and utterly terrifying. Nico parked the car in a circular driveway that could have doubled as a showroom for luxury vehicles. He opened her door, his expression unreadable. This way. Miss Carter. Emily stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath her sensible work shoes. She felt painfully underdressed in her scrubs and oversized cardigan, a stark contrast to the grandeur looming over her. She followed Nico up the wide stone steps, conscious of the security cameras tracking her every movement. Inside, the house smelled of beeswax, old paper, and something sharp, like expensive scotch. The foyer was cavernous, with a marble floor that reflected the crystal chandelier above. It was silent. A tomb of wealth. He's in the study, Nico said, gesturing down a hallway lined with oil paintings. He led her to a set of heavy mahogany doors and knocked once before pushing them open. Luca Moretti was standing by the fireplace, his back to the door. For a moment, Emily forgot to breathe. In the hospital, he'd been a patient, bloody, vulnerable, attached to machines. Here in his domain, he was something else entirely. He turned as they entered. He was wearing a black button-down shirt, the top few buttons undone, and dark slacks. The clothes were tailored to perfection. Hiding the bandages she knew were wrapped around his torso, he looked tired. Yes, there was a pallor to his skin that spoke of blood loss, but the weakness was gone. In its place was a quiet, vibrating intensity that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. "Thank you, Nico," Luca said. His voice was deeper than she remembered, smooth and commanding. "Leave us." Nico nodded and backed out of the room, closing the heavy doors with a soft click. Emily stood alone with the wolf she had patched up. Luca walked toward her, his movement slightly stiff but steady. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for her to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "You came," he said. "I was not given much of a choice," Emily replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "Your associate made it clear that a refusal would be inconvenient." Luca's mouth twitched, threatening a smile. "Nico has a way of being persuasive. I apologize if he frightened you. That was not the intent." He gestured toward two leather armchairs positioned near the fireplace, where a low fire crackled, warding off the damp chill of the night. A silver tray with a coffee pot and two porcelain cups sat on a small table between them. "Please," Luca said. "Sit. You look like you're ready to bolt for the door." "I am considering it," Emily admitted, but she sat down. Her legs felt unsteady, and the leather chair was undeniably comfortable. Luca took the seat opposite her. He poured the coffee himself, his movements deliberate. She watched his hands, strong, steady, with the silver ring gleaming on his pinky. It was strange to see those hands holding delicate china instead of a weapon. "I wanted to thank you," Luca said, handing her a cup. "Properly." "You thanked me at the hospital," Emily said, taking the cup. The heat seeped into her cold fingers. "That was through a haze of anesthesia and adrenaline," Luca corrected. "And it was before I knew the extent of what you did." "Nico told me about the evidence, the bullet, the wallet." Emily took a sip of the coffee. It was rich, dark, and far better than the sludge in the break room. "I did not do it for you." She repeated the mantra she had been telling herself for 3 days. "I did it to prevent a bloodbath in my ER." "So you have said," Luca murmured. He leaned back, studying her over the rim of his cup. "But you could have let the security guard call the police. You could have handed over the bullet. My men would have been arrested. Perhaps. There might have been violence." "Yes, but you chose to obstruct justice to protect a criminal. Why?" Emily set her cup down with a sharp clank. She bristled at the label, even though it was accurate. "I am a nurse. Mr. Moretti. My job is to save lives. All lives. Even the ones that maybe do not deserve saving. If the police had taken you then, you would have bled out in a holding cell or been shanked in the infirmary. I treated the patient in front of me." Luca's eyes narrowed slightly. "Intrigued. You despise what I do." "I despise the violence," Emily countered, meeting his gaze. "I despise the fact that I spend half my shifts stitching up kids who get caught in the crossfire of your turf wars. I despise that people in this city are afraid to walk down certain streets because of the color of their shirt." "Then why save the man responsible for it?" Luca asked softly. "Because in that moment, you were not a boss," Emily said, leaning forward, her frustration overriding her fear. "You were just a man with 3 holes in him, and I took an oath." Luca watched her, silence stretching between them. The firelight danced in his eyes, making them look liquid. He did not look angry at her accusation. He looked impressed. "You are a contradiction. Emily Carter," he said. "You have a moral compass that points true north. Yet you are sitting in the devil's living room drinking his coffee." Emily felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She picked up her cup again, using it as a shield. "I am only here because you insisted." Luca leaned forward, mirroring her posture. The distance between them shrank. The air in the room suddenly felt heavier, charged with static. "I insisted because I owe you a debt," Luca said. His voice dropped, becoming intimate, rough around the edges. "In my world, debts are everything. You saved my life. That means your life is now my concern. I do not want your concern," Emily said quickly. "I just want to go back to my job and pretend this never happened." "It is too late for that," Luca said. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the table. He did not touch her, but the proximity made her skin tingle. "You are a civilian," Luca said. "You do not understand how this works. When you hid that bullet, you stepped off the sidewalk and into the street. People talk. Whispers travel. There are rumors that I was saved by an angel in the ER. If my enemies find out who that angel is, they will not see a nurse. They will see a leverage point. A chill went down Emily's spine. Are you threatening me? No, Lucas said, his eyes fierce. I am warning you. And I am offering you protection. I do not need your protection, Emily said, standing up. Her fight-or-flight response was screaming at her to leave. I have lived in this city my whole life without a bodyguard. Mr. Moretti, I think I can manage. Luca stood as well, even injured. He loomed over her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence overwhelming. You have lived in this city while being invisible? He said, You are not invisible anymore. I am leaving, Emily stated, clutching her purse. Thank you for the coffee. Do not send the car for me again. She turned and walked toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Emily! Luca called out. She paused, her hand on the brass handle. She did not turn around. If you need anything, he said, his voice echoing in the large room. Anything at all. You call. I won't, she whispered. She opened the door and walked out, leaving him standing by the fire. But as Nico drove her home in silence, she could still feel the phantom warmth of Luca's gaze on the back of her neck. 4 nights later, the reality of Luca's warning crashed into Emily's life. It was 2 a.m. The rain had returned, turning the streets of her neighborhood into slick, black mirrors. Emily was walking the 3 blocks from the bus stop to her apartment building. Her car had refused to start that morning, a dead alternator, and she was too stubborn to call a cab. The street was empty. The streetlights hummed overhead, casting pools of yellow light on the wet pavement. Then she heard it, the slow crunch of tires on gravel behind her. Emily tightened her grip on her umbrella. She walked faster. The car matched her pace. It was not passing. It was crawling. She took a sharp right turn onto her street. The car turned too. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She remembered Luca's words. You are not invisible anymore. She reached into her bag, her fingers fumbling for her phone, for pepper spray, for anything. The car accelerated suddenly. The engine revving, Emily spun around, terrified, just as the headlights blinded her. Before she could scream, a second vehicle, a dark SUV, screeched out of the alleyway to her left. It cut off the stalking car, blocking the road diagonally. The doors of the SUV flew open. 2 men jumped out. One of them was Nico. The stalking car slammed into reverse, tires squealing against the asphalt. It spun around in a frantic 3-point turn and sped off into the night, disappearing around the corner before Nico could reach it. Nico did not give chase. He turned and walked toward Emily. She was pressed against a brick wall, breathing hard, the rain soaking her hair. Are you hurt? Nico asked. He sounded calm, professional, as if he were asking if she wanted cream in her coffee. Emily shook her head, unable to speak. Her knees felt like water. Nico sighed, taking a black umbrella from one of the other men and holding it over her. Mr. Moretti thought this might happen, Nico said. You were following me? Emily managed to choke out. We were watching you, Nico corrected. There is a difference. That car has been circling your block for 2 nights. D'Angelo plates. They are looking for the mystery woman. Emily felt sick. The D'Angelo syndicate, the rivals, the ones who had put the bullets in Luca in the first place. I didn't think, she stammered. Nico guided her toward the SUV. You did not think it was real. Now you know. You cannot walk these streets alone anymore. Miss Carter, not until the heat dies down. I cannot live like a prisoner, Emily whispered, looking at the empty street where the car had been. You won't have to, Nico said. But you need someone closer. Someone who does not look like me. The next morning, there was a knock on Emily's apartment door. She opened it cautiously, the chain still latched. Standing in the hallway was a young man. He could not have been older than 25. He had messy brown hair, a crooked smile, and was holding a plate of brownies. He wore faded jeans and a t-shirt. He looked like a college student, or maybe a barista. Hi, the young man said, his grin infectious. I am Finn. I just moved into Unit 3B down the hall. My mom sent me these. She is convinced I'm going to starve, so she overbaked. Want some? Emily stared at him. He looked harmless, completely, utterly harmless. "Who are you really?" she asked, her voice tired. Finn's smile didn't waver, but his eyes shifted. They were sharp, assessing, scanning the hallway behind him. "Marco Fiore," he said, his voice dropping just enough for her to hear. "But everyone calls me Finn. Luca sent me." Emily looked at the brownies. "Store-bought, transferred to a plate." "You are the bodyguard?" she asked. "I am the neighbor," Finn corrected, winking. "I'm going to fix your alternator, carry your groceries, and make sure no one with a D'Angelo tattoo gets within 50 feet of this door. And I make excellent coffee." Emily hesitated. She should slam the door. She should call the police. But she remembered the headlights blinding her in the rain. She remembered the fear. She undid the chain and opened the door. "Come in, Finn," she said. "But if you eat all the brownies, you are fired." A week later, Emily's phone buzzed during her lunch break. It was a number she did not recognize. "Appointment at the clinic on 5th Street, 2 p.m. Routine check of the sutures. He requested you." It was signed simply, N. Emily stared at the screen. She should say no. She was an ER nurse, not a private concierge doctor for mob bosses. But the memory of Luca's wounds, the hasty stitching she had done in the trauma bay, nagged at her professional conscience. If they got infected, if he developed sepsis. She swapped shifts with Jenna, making up a lie about a dental emergency. The clinic was discreet, located in a nondescript brick building that smelled of lavender and money. There was no waiting room, just a private suite. Luca was sitting on the exam table when she entered. He was shirtless. Emily faltered in the doorway. It was strictly medical, she told herself. Just skin and muscle and scar tissue. But the sight of him stripped of the armor of his suits was disarming. He was built like a fighter, lean muscle, broad chest, defined abdominals, but his torso was a map of violence. Old scars, silver and jagged, crisscrossed his skin, telling stories of a life she could barely imagine. And there, fresh and angry red, were the incisions she had closed. "You are late," Luca said, though he did not check a watch. "I had to lie to my supervisor to get here," Emily said, closing the door and snapping on a pair of latex gloves. "It was easier when you were unconscious." She walked over to him. The room was small. The air felt thin. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice strictly clinical. "Better," Luca said. His eyes followed her hands as she reached for the supplies on the tray. "Finn tells me you let him fix your car. He is persistent," Emily muttered, "and he is surprisingly good at mechanics for someone who carries a concealed weapon." "He is a good kid," Luca said. "He'll keep you safe." Emily moved between his knees to get a better look at the stitches on his abdomen. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "This one is pulling a little," she said, her fingers gently probing the area around the lowest wound. "You've been moving too much." "Lifting things?" "Just the weight of the world," Luca said dryly. Emily looked up. Their faces were inches apart. She had not realized how close she had leaned in until she met his eyes. They were dark, dilated, focused entirely on her mouth. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The silence was deafening, filled only by the sound of their breathing. Emily's fingers were still resting on his bare skin, just above the waistband of his trousers. She could feel the hard ridge of muscle tensing beneath her touch. She should pull away. She should step back and scold him for popping a stitch. But she didn't. Luca's gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. The intensity of it was like a physical touch. He leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. His scent, cedar, soap, and something uniquely him, filled her senses. "Emily," he whispered. The way he said her name sounded like a confession. Her heart hammered against her ribs for a terrifying, exhilarating second. She wanted him to close the gap. She wanted to know what he tasted like. She wanted to cross the line she had drawn in the sand. Her breath hitched. Her fingers curled slightly against his skin. Then, reality crashed back in. He was a criminal, a killer. The reason for the bodies in her morgue? She snatched her hands back as if she had been burned. She stepped back, hitting the counter behind her with a clumsy thud. "Everything looks fine," she stammered, stripping off her gloves with shaking hands. "Keep it clean. Do not stretch. I have to go." Luca did not move. He sat perfectly still on the table, watching her. He did not look angry at her rejection. He looked resigned, and perhaps a little regretful. "Thank you, Emily," he said quietly. She grabbed her bag and fled the room, her face burning. That night, Emily lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling. The streetlights filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of shadow across her duvet. She could still feel the phantom sensation of his skin under her fingertips. She could still hear the rough timbre of his voice saying her name. She turned over, punching her pillow. "He's dangerous," she whispered to the darkness. "He is everything you hate." But as she closed her eyes, the image that played on the back of her eyelids was not the gunshots or the blood or the fear. It was Luca Moretti's eyes in that small, sterile room, looking at her as if she were the only honest thing he had ever seen. And terrifyingly, she knew that if he had leaned in just 1 inch more, she might not have pulled away. The ceasefire, if it could even be called that, ended on a Tuesday night with the sound of shattering glass. It happened at Vittorio's, a high-end Italian restaurant on the north side of Havenport that served as one of the Moretti family's legitimate fronts. The place was an institution, known for its veal scallopini and the fact that the city's elite could dine there without fear of being photographed. But sanctity in Havenport was a fragile thing, easily broken by the roar of a drive-by shooting. Luca Moretti stood amidst the wreckage of the main dining room, his shoes crunching over shards of crystal and porcelain. The air smelled of gunpowder, spilled wine, and fear. The attack had been precise, a spray of automatic fire tearing through the front windows, shredding the velvet curtains and the mahogany bar. 3 of his men were being loaded into ambulances out back to avoid the press. They would survive, but the message was louder than the gunfire itself. This was not a random act of violence. This was a challenge. "Marco D'Angelo is done testing the water," Nico Rossi said, stepping over an overturned chair. He was on his phone, barking orders to the cleanup crew. He just dove in head first. Luca did not answer immediately. He picked up a heavy silver fork from the floor. Turning it over in his hand, it was twisted, struck by a stray bullet. "He is impatient," Luca said quietly. His voice was calm, but it possessed a terrifying stillness. "He wants to see if I will bleed. He wants to see if you will retaliate," Nico corrected, hanging up the phone, "or if the rumors are true." "What rumors?" Luca asked, tossing the ruined fork onto a table. Nico hesitated. In the harsh lighting of the restaurant, the bruising from the past few weeks of stress looked stark on his face. "The streets are talking. Luca, they say you have gone soft since the shooting. They say you are distracted, and they are whispering about a woman." Luca froze. He turned slowly to face his second-in-command. "Explain." "Finn heard it from a contact in the D'Angelo crew," Nico said, his voice lowering. "They are calling her the nurse who saved the king. They do not have a name yet, not for certain, but they know she exists. They know someone in that hospital broke the law for you, and they know you have been protecting her." A cold knot tightened in Luca's stomach, sharper than the pain of his healing wounds. Emily. She was no longer just a loose end or a civilian he felt indebted to. She was a target. And she was a target not because of anything she had done, but simply because he had allowed himself to care. In Marco D'Angelo's world, caring was a weakness. It was a soft underbelly waiting to be sliced open. "Find out exactly what they know," Luca ordered, "and double the surveillance on her apartment. If a D'Angelo soldier so much as breathes the air on her street, I want him buried before he can exhale." The strategy changed. Isolation was no longer safety, it was blindness. If people were watching Emily, Luca needed to be the one watching closest. 2 days later, the staff of Havenport General Hospital were thrown into a frenzy by the arrival of an unexpected benefactor. The hospital board announced a massive anonymous donation dedicated to upgrading the trauma ward's equipment, and the donor had requested a tour of the facilities to see where the money was going. When Luca walked through the double doors of the ER, flanked by hospital administrators who looked equal parts thrilled and terrified, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He was not wearing the bloodied shirt of a dying man this time. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him like armor, his dark hair perfectly styled, his demeanor that of a philanthropic businessman rather than a crime lord. But the eyes. Emily felt them the moment he entered the ward. She was at the nurse's station, updating a chart. Her pen froze on the paper. He shouldn't be here, she thought, panic rising in her throat. Mr. Moretti, the chief of medicine said, gesturing grandly to the bustling floor. As you can see, our staff works miracles with very limited resources. Your contribution will save countless lives. I have a deep appreciation for the work done here, Luca said smoothly. His gaze swept the room, landing unerringly on Emily. Some of your staff, in particular, show exceptional dedication. Emily kept her head down, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could feel the stares of her co-workers. The whispers started almost immediately. Was that him? Was that the patient from room 402? Throughout the afternoon, Luca moved through the hospital like a shark in a decorative pond. He asked intelligent questions. He shook hands. He played the part perfectly. But every time Emily looked up, he was there, at the end of a hallway, near the elevator bank, visible through the glass of the waiting room. He was marking his territory. He was letting everyone know, without saying a word, that this place and the people in it were under his watch. It infuriated her. It terrified her. And God help her. It made her feel safe in a way she hated to admit. But the shift took a turn that no amount of money or protection could fix. It was late afternoon when the call came in. Multi-car pileup on the interstate. One of the victims was a 7-year-old girl. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Emily worked until her arms ached, her scrubs stained with blood that wasn't hers. She performed CPR until her own lungs burned. She fought with everything she had, every ounce of skill and training, to keep the small heart beating. But sometimes, the fight was not enough. When the doctor finally called the time of death, the silence that fell over the trauma bay was heavier than lead. Emily stood there for a moment, staring at the small, still form, feeling a piece of her own soul crack and break away. She stripped off her gloves, walked out of the bay, and kept walking. She ignored Jenna calling her name. She ignored the next ambulance pulling in. She needed air. She needed silence. She found the supply closet at the end of the hall, a small, windowless room filled with boxes of gauze and saline. She slipped inside, closed the door, and slid down the wall until she hit the floor. She didn't cry immediately. She just sat there, shaking, her hands pressed over her face, trying to block out the image of the little girl's shoes sitting on the shelf, never to be worn again. The door opened. Emily flinched, expecting a supervisor telling her to get back to work. It was Luca. He slipped inside and closed the door behind him, plunging the room into a dim, intimate quiet. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer a cliché about how she did her best. He just stood there, his presence filling the small space, pushing back the cold sterility of the hospital. "Get out," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, I cannot do this right now." Luca didn't leave. He took a step closer. He crouched down in his expensive suit, not caring that the floor was dusty, until he was eye level with her. "Breathe, Emily," he said softly. It was the command in his voice that broke her. The dam snapped. A sob ripped through her chest, violent and ugly. She buried her face in her knees, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. It was the accumulation of everything, the shooting, the threats, the fear, and now this innocent life snuffed out on her table. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was heavy, warm and steady. Luca stayed there as she wept, a silent anchor in the storm. He did not try to hush her. He let her feel it. When the sobs finally subsided into jagged breaths, Emily lifted her head. She felt raw, exposed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of mascara on her cheek. "You shouldn't see me like this," she rasped. "I have seen you save a man's life with a gun pointed at you," Luca said, his voice low and rough. "There is nothing you could do that would make me think less of you." He reached out. His thumb brushed the tear-stained skin of her cheek, catching a fresh drop before it could fall. His skin was rough, calloused from a life of violence, but his touch was impossibly gentle. "Why are you here, Luca?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Why won't you just leave me alone?" "Because I can't," he admitted. The admission hung in the air between them. Emily looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes that mirrored her own. She saw the burden of a war he hadn't chosen but had to finish. And she saw a hunger that terrified her. She didn't know who moved first. One moment, they were staring at each other in the dim light of the supply closet. The next, Emily was surging forward, her hands clutching the lapels of his jacket, and Luca was pulling her into him. Their lips met with a collision that was more desperation than romance. It wasn't a sweet, cinematic kiss. It tasted of salt and fear and exhaustion. It was frantic. It was the physical manifestation of two people standing on the edge of a cliff, grabbing onto each other to keep from falling. Luca groaned low in his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated need. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her slightly, pulling her flush against his chest. His hands slid up her back, tangling in her hair, holding her like he was afraid she would vanish if he let go. Emily melted into him. For the first time in weeks, the noise in her head stopped. There was only him. The heat of his body, the strength of his arms, the way his mouth moved against hers with a possessive intensity that made her knees weak. She pressed closer, her fingers curling into the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him down. It was forbidden. It was dangerous. It was wrong in 100 different ways, and it was the only thing that felt real. They broke apart only when the need for air became painful. Luca rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. His hands were still on her waist, his grip bruisingly tight. Emily's chest heaved, her eyes wide, her lips swollen. "We can't," she whispered, though she didn't move away. "I know," Luca rasped. He pulled back enough to look at her. The intensity in his gaze scorched her. He looked at her not like a conquest, but like a salvation. Like she was the only clean thing in a world covered in filth. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "Leave this place. Leave the blood and the death. I can take you somewhere safe. Somewhere they will never find us." Emily closed her eyes for a second, letting herself imagine it. A life without sirens, a life without fear. "I can't," she said, opening her eyes. "I can't abandon my patients. Luca, I can't run away. That is not who I am." Luca stared at her, a mixture of frustration and admiration warring in his features. He ran a hand over his face, composing himself, the mask of the Mafia boss slowly sliding back into place. "No," he said softly. "I suppose it isn't." He stood up, offering her a hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet. He straightened her scrubs, his hands lingering for a second longer than necessary on her arms. "Stay safe, Emily," he said, and then he was gone, slipping out of the door and leaving her alone in the quiet, smelling of cedar and rain, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs, while Luca was losing his heart in a hospital supply closet. His empire was beginning to fracture. Across town, in the back room of a smoky billiard hall, Rafe Lombardi was holding court. Rafe was one of Luca's capos, a man with ambition that outweighed his loyalty. He slammed a heavy fist onto the pool table, scattering the balls. "He's not thinking clearly," Rafe shouted to the 3 soldiers standing around him. "We have D'Angelo hitting our restaurants, threatening our turf. And where is the boss? Is he planning a counterstrike? No, he's at the hospital, playing philanthropist. He's being cautious." One of the soldiers mumbled, "Luca has always been strategic." "Strategic?" Rafe spat. "He's distracted, he is soft. He's running around after a skirt while our earnings drop. A leader who cannot focus is a leader who gets us all killed." The room fell silent. Treason was a heavy word, even when unspoken. Rafe leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "Marco D'Angelo is strong. He's hungry. He's not distracted by sentiment. If Luca won't do what needs to be done to save this family, maybe it is time for someone else to step up." The seeds were planted, and unlike the flowers in Luca's garden, these would bear poisonous fruit. The consequences of distraction arrived 48 hours later. It was a Tuesday night. typically the quietest time for shipping logistics. The Moretti family used a warehouse near the docks to store high-value electronics, a legitimate business that funded the darker side of their operations. The attack was surgical. A convoy of black vans smashed through the perimeter fence at exactly 11 o'clock, the precise 10-minute window when the shift change occurred and security was lightest. Heavily armed men poured out, wearing balaclavas and tactical gear. They didn't just steal the cargo, they burned the warehouse to the ground. 2 of Luca's men, guards who had been with the family for years, were executed kneeling on the asphalt. Luca stood before the smoldering ruins the next morning, the smell of wet ash and burnt plastic stinging his nose. The fire department had put out the blaze, but the skeleton of the building was all that remained. Finn walked up to him, his face pale. "Boss," Finn said, handing him a tablet. "You need to see this." Luca took the device. It showed security footage from a camera across the street that the attackers had missed. It showed the vans waiting. They had been parked there for 20 minutes, waiting for the exact second the guards switched rotations. They knew the schedule, Luca said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Down to the second," Finn confirmed, and they knew which gate had the faulty sensor. Luca lowered the tablet. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just surveillance. This wasn't D'Angelo getting lucky. "We have a leak," Luca said. "Someone inside the family," Finn whispered. "Someone close enough to know the rotations." Luca looked at the ashes of his warehouse. If the traitor knew the warehouse schedule, what else did they know? Did they know his safe house locations? Did they know his roots? Did they know about the woman he had kissed in a supply closet? The image of Emily, laughing with him over coffee, flashed through his mind. Then, the image of her bleeding on a floor like his men. Luca turned to Finn, his eyes burning with a terrifying resolve. "Pull everyone in," he ordered. "I want every capo, every soldier, every associate in the main house tonight. We are going to find the rat." "And Emily?" Finn asked. Luca looked toward the city's skyline, toward the hospital where she was likely starting her shift. "Triple the guard on her," Luca said. "If this war is coming inside the house, she is the first thing they will try to break." He got into his car, the door slamming shut with a finality that echoed like a gunshot. The simmering war was over. The fire had started, and Luca knew that before it was extinguished, he would have to burn down half the city to keep her safe. The smell of smoke still clung to Luca Moretti's jacket when he walked into the small waiting room of the hospital, a scent that cut through the sterile antiseptic air like a warning. He did not care about the stares of the nurses or the hush that fell over the hallway. He only cared about the woman standing by the vending machine, looking exhausted and stubbornly ordinary in her blue scrubs. "Emily," Luca said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You are coming with me?" Emily turned, a bag of pretzels in her hand. She looked at him, taking in the soot on his collar and the hard line of his jaw. "I have a shift tomorrow. Luca," she said, her tone weary but firm, "I am not going anywhere." "It is not a request," Luca said. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, blocking out the rest of the world. "My warehouse was burned to the ground 2 hours ago. 2 of my men are dead. The people who did it knew our schedule down to the second, which means they are watching us. And if they are watching me, they are watching you." "I am just a nurse," Emily argued, though her grip on the pretzel bag tightened. "To them, I am nobody. To them, you are the woman I visit 3 times a week," Luca countered. "You are the leverage they need. Pack a bag. Emily, you are staying at the estate. I can't just live in a Mafia fortress," she hissed, keeping her voice low so the triage nurse wouldn't hear. "I have a cat to feed. I have bills to pay. I have a life that does not involve armed guards." Finn stepped forward then. He had been standing silently by the door, looking less like a friendly neighbor and more like the soldier he truly was. He held out a manila envelope. Emily took it. Her hands shook slightly as she slid the photos out. The first one was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed her walking into her apartment building. The second was clearer. It was a shot through her kitchen window, showing her standing at the sink, washing dishes. The third made her blood turn to ice. It was a photo of her sleeping, taken through the fire escape window. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago. They are not just watching, Finn said softly. They are scouting. They are looking for entry points. Emily stared at the image of her own sleeping face. She felt violated. She felt the safety of her small, cluttered apartment dissolve into nothingness. "Pack your things," she whispered, dropping the photos back into the envelope. "I will get my cat." The Moretti estate was even more imposing at night. The iron gates shut behind the car with a finality that felt like a prison sentence. Emily sat in the passenger seat, clutching her cat carrier. Watching the trees blur past, she felt like an intruder entering a world where she did not belong, a world built on blood and secrets. Luca did not speak during the drive. He seemed lost in a dark reverie, his eyes fixed on the road, his hand resting on the gear shift near hers but never touching it. When they arrived, the house was silent. The staff had retired, leaving the grand hallways dim and shadowy. "Your room is this way," Luca said, taking her duffel bag. He led her up the sweeping staircase to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. It was beautiful, decorated in creams and golds, with a 4-poster bed and heavy silk curtains. But as Luca set her bag down, Emily noticed the reinforced locks on the windows. She noticed the panic button by the bedside demo. It was a gilded cage. "Try to sleep," Luca said, standing in the doorway. "You are safe here." "Safe," Emily repeated, looking at the panic button. "Is that what this is?" "It is the best I can offer," Luca said quietly. "Good night." Emily. Sleep did not come easily in the following nights. The silence of the estate was heavy, broken only by the occasional patrol of the guards outside. Emily felt restless, out of place among the antique furniture and the silent servants. She began to wander. One night, unable to sleep, she went downstairs to find water. She heard music drifting from the living room, a slow, melancholy melody played on a piano. She followed the sound, her bare feet making no noise on the plush rugs. The living room was dark, lit only by the moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Luca was sitting at the grand piano, his back to her. He was playing something classical, something full of longing and regret. His shoulders, usually so rigid with the weight of command, were slumped forward. Emily watched him for a long time. She saw the man beneath the title. She saw the exhaustion, the loneliness, on the table beside the piano. She noticed a stack of books. They were not business ledgers or tactical manuals. They were novels. The Count of Monte Cristo, Great Expectations. The covers were worn, the spines cracked from repeated reading. Next to the books was a framed photograph of a smiling boy on a bicycle, squinting into the sun, a glimpse of a childhood that had existed before the violence took over. Luca stopped playing. He did not turn around. "You should be asleep," he said. "You play beautifully," Emily said, stepping into the room. "My mother taught me," Luca replied, his fingers lingering on the keys. "Before she died. It was the only quiet thing in this house." He turned then, looking at her in the shadows. "Do you hate it here?" he asked. "I hate why I am here," Emily answered honestly, "but I am starting to understand the person who lives here." Luca stood up, closing the piano lid. "Do not try to understand me. Emily, it will only disappoint you." The connection between them grew in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the fear. It was in the way he ensured her favorite tea was stocked in the kitchen. It was in the way she started leaving her books on his desk, reclaiming small corners of his fortress. Then came the storm. It was a Tuesday, a week after she had arrived. A massive thunderstorm rolled off the coast, battering Havenport with gale-force winds. The lights in the mansion flickered and died, plunging the estate into darkness. The backup generators kicked in for the security systems, but the main house remained dim. Emily was in the upstairs hallway, trying to find her way back to her room, when she nearly collided with Luca. "Careful." His voice came from the dark. A match flared. Luca held a silver candelabra, the small flame illuminating his face. The shadows danced across his sharp cheekbones and the hollow of his throat. "I was looking for you," he said. "I didn't want you to be afraid." "I am not afraid of the dark," Emily said. though her heart quickened at his proximity. "I am afraid of what hides in it." Luca stepped closer, extending the candle so she could see. "I am the only thing hiding in this dark." "Emily," he murmured. They stood there in the flickering light, the storm raging outside against the glass. The air between them felt thin, electrified. "Here," Luca said, offering her the candle. "Take this to your room." Emily reached for it. Her fingers brushed his as she took the heavy silver base. A spark, hotter than the flame, shot up her arm. Luca did not pull his hand away immediately. His fingers grazed her wrist, his thumb resting for a heartbeat on her pulse point. "You are trembling," he noted softly. "It is cold." She lied. Luca smiled, a small, knowing thing. "I sleep better knowing you are down the hall." "Emily," he confessed, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "It is the first time in 10 years I have not slept with a gun under my pillow." "Why?" Emily breathed. "Because for the first time, I am more afraid of losing something inside the house than fighting something outside it." He pulled his hand back slowly, leaving her standing there with the candle, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The tension finally snapped 2 nights later. Emily was in Luca's study, looking for a book she had left behind. The room was warm, filled with the scent of old paper and the cedarwood fire burning in the hearth. Luca was working at his massive oak desk, reviewing documents that undoubtedly detailed illicit activities. He looked up when she entered. He looked tired. He had been fielding calls about the warehouse fire all day, trying to keep his organization from crumbling. "I am sorry," Emily said, backing away. "I did not mean to disturb you." "Stay," Luca said. "Please." He stood up and walked around the desk. He looked at her with a hunger he no longer bothered to hide. "I am tired of pretending." "Emily," he said. "Pretending what?" she asked, her breath catching. "Pretending that I do not want to cross this room and touch you. Pretending that I am noble enough to keep my distance." Emily felt her resolve shatter. She'd spent weeks telling herself he was dangerous, that he was wrong for her, but looking at him now, stripped of his armor, she only saw the man who had held her while she cried in a supply closet. "Then don't pretend," she whispered. Luca crossed the distance in 2 long strides. He reached out, his hands hovering at her waist, giving her one last chance to back away. "Are you sure?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "Yes," she breathed. He pulled her against him, not with the violence she might have expected, but with a desperate, crushing gentleness. Emily gasped as her body collided with his. Her hands flattened against his chest, feeling the heavy, rapid thud of his heart beneath the silk of his shirt. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not like the kiss in the hospital. That had been reactive, born of grief. This was deliberate. It was slow, unhurried, and devastatingly thorough. His lips moved over hers with a mastery that made her knees weak. He tasted of scotch and longing. Emily made a soft sound in the back of her throat and opened to him. Luca groaned, his control slipping. He lifted her effortlessly, setting her onto the edge of his heavy oak desk. Sweeping the papers aside with one arm, he stepped between her knees, pressing closer until there was no air left between them. His hands slid up her waist, molding her to him, his thumbs digging into her hips. Emily wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers tangling in the dark hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him down. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent, ragged. They breathed each other in. It was a release of weeks of pent-up fear and desire. Luca's hand moved to her jaw, tilting her head back, trailing kisses down the column of her throat. Emily arched into him, her hands gripping his shoulders. "Luca," she sighed, in name a prayer on her lips. He froze. His forehead rested against hers. His breathing was harsh, uneven. His hands were shaking where they held her. He pulled back, just an inch. His eyes were blown wide, dark with desire, but clouded with something else. Restraint. "I need to stop," he rasped, his voice wrecked. "Why?" Emily whispered, trying to pull him back. "Because you are under my protection," Luca said, closing his eyes as if in pain. "You are in my house. You are vulnerable. I do not want you to ever look back on this night and feel like I took advantage of that, like I used my power to get what I wanted. Emily reached up, cupping his face in her hands. She forced him to look at her. "You are not taking anything, Luca," she said firmly. "I am giving it. I chose this too." Luca looked at her, searching for any sign of hesitation. When he found none, he let out a shuddering breath and leaned his forehead against hers again. "We stop here," he said, though it clearly cost him everything to say it, "for tonight. Because I want more than just tonight with you, Emily. And if I don't stop now, I won't stop at all." He helped her down from the desk, his hands lingering on her waist. He kissed her forehead, a tender, reverent gesture that shook her more than the passion had. "Go to bed, Emily," he whispered, "before I change my mind." The next morning, the kitchen was filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the bright, unforgiving light of day. Emily walked in to find Luca standing by the counter, brewing a fresh pot. He turned when he heard her. There was no awkwardness, no regret in his expression, just a soft, weary smile that reached his eyes. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Emily replied, feeling a blush heat her cheeks. She walked over to him. He poured a mug and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it. A deliberate, lingering touch. "Milk. No sugar, right?" he asked. "You remembered," she said. "I remember everything about you," Luca said simply. They stood there in the sunlit kitchen, drinking coffee in silence. It was a domestic, fragile moment. It felt like playing house in the middle of a war zone. But for those few minutes, looking at the way the sun caught the gray in his hair, Emily allowed herself to imagine that this could be real, that this deep, terrifying attachment building between them could survive the world outside. But the world outside had other plans. In the security wing of the estate, Finn was staring at a monitor, his face grim. He had been running the internal audit Luca had ordered. It had taken days of sifting through encrypted logs and burner phone records, but he had found it. Rafe Lombardi. There were inconsistencies in Rafe's schedule. Tuesday night, the night of the warehouse fire, Rafe's phone had pinged off a tower 3 miles away from where he claimed to be. And 3 days ago, Rafe had withdrawn a large sum of cash from a slush fund account, money that had not been authorized. Secret meetings, altered logs, it all pointed to one thing. Finn picked up the phone to call Luca, but before he could dial, a piercing siren ripped through the air. The alarm was deafening. It screamed through the hallways of the mansion, shattering the morning peace. Emily dropped her mug. It shattered on the tile floor, hot coffee splashing her ankles. Luca was moving before the first shard hit the ground. He grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the windows. "Move!" he shouted, his domestic demeanor vanishing instantly. "Into the hallway, now!" Guards swarmed the house, weapons drawn. Finn came running down the stairs, shouting orders. "Code red, perimeter breach. Get the boss to the safe room." Luca dragged Emily down a hidden staircase behind the library, his grip bruising. They huddled in the reinforced panic room for 20 agonizing minutes while the security team swept the grounds. It turned out to be a false alarm. A sensor on the east gate had been tripped by a stray animal, or at least that was the official story. But when Finn returned, his face was pale. "We found a package at the gate," Finn said quietly. "No explosives, just a message." He held up a card. It was a funeral card. On the front, someone had scrawled a single word in red marker. "Soon." Emily stared at the card. She realized then, with a clarity that made her nauseous, that the heavy stone walls of the estate were not a shield. They were a target. She was not safe here. Luca was not safe here. They were sitting ducks in a golden pond that night. Emily found Luca on the balcony overlooking the grounds. He was smoking a cigarette, something she had never seen him do. His other hand gripped the stone railing so hard his knuckles were white. "Luca," she said softly. He didn't turn. "They know where we live," she said, stepping out into the cold night air. "That alarm today. It wasn't an accident. It was a reminder." "I know," Luca said, exhaling a plume of smoke. Emily walked up to him. She placed a hand on his arm. The muscle beneath his jacket was rock hard. "How far are you willing to go?" she asked. "To win this war? How many people have to die? As many as it takes to keep you breathing, Luca said, looking at her. His eyes were dark, haunted. That is not an answer, Emily said. Is there ever an end, Luca? Could you ever leave it? She asked the question that had been burning in her chest since the night in the study. Could you walk away? From the money, from the power, from the violence? Luca flicked the cigarette over the railing. He watched the embers fall into the darkness below. Before I met you, he said quietly, I never thought about the future. Men in my position. We do not plan for retirement. We plan for our funerals. I assumed I would die in a suit, probably in the street, probably before I turned 40. He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. I never imagined a different life. Emily, I never wanted one, because I had nothing to lose. And now, Emily whispered. Luca looked at her, his expression raw and open. Now, he said, his voice breaking, I am terrified, because I look at you, and I want a life I do not know how to build. I want to leave it. God, Emily, I want to leave it all behind. But I don't know if they will let me, and I don't know if I can get us out alive. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair as the wind howled around them. Emily held him tight, feeling the desperation in his embrace. We will figure it out, she whispered into his chest. But as she looked out over the dark grounds, she knew that wanting to leave and actually escaping were two very different things, and the man who had sent that funeral card was not going to let them walk away without a fight. The betrayal arrived not with a bang, but with a stream of data scrolling across a monitor in the secure server room of the Moretti estate. Finn sat hunched over the glowing screens, his usually boyish face cast in grim shadows. Beside him, Luca stood like a statue carved from ice, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the evidence of his own failure to see the snake in the grass. It was Rafe Lombardi. The intercepted messages were fragmented but damning. Timestamps that matched the warehouse fire, GPS coordinates of safe houses sent to burner phones registered to D'Angelo Associates, and finally, a bank transfer routed through 3 shell companies, landing in an offshore account with Rafe's biometric access codes. He sold us out, Finn said, his voice quiet with disbelief. He sold us out for a seat at Marco's table. Where is he? Luca asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Gone, Finn replied, tipping furiously. His apartment is empty. His phone is dead. He vanished an hour ago. He knows we are looking. Luca turned, his hand reaching for the radio to order a city-wide manhunt. But before he could speak, his personal cell phone buzzed. It was not a call. It was a video message. The sender was unknown. Luca stared at the device in his hand. A cold, nauseating dread settled in the pit of his stomach, heavier than lead. He tapped the screen. The video was shaky, filmed in the back of a moving vehicle. It was dark, illuminated only by the passing streetlights flaring through the windows. The camera focused on a figure lying on the metal floor of the van. It was Emily. She was unconscious, her hands bound in front of her with thick plastic zip ties. Her hair was messy, plastered to her cheek, and there was a small bruise blooming on her temple. She looked small, fragile. Then, a voice spoke from behind the camera. It was smooth, mocking, and unmistakably Marco D'Angelo. The king sits on his throne, Marco's voice sneered, the audio distorting slightly. But he forgot that a king is nothing without his queen. You wanted a war? Luca, you have one. I will end you through her. The video cut to black. A roar of pure, primal fury ripped through Luca's chest. He did not scream. He did not shout. Instead, he hurled the phone across the room with such force that it shattered against the far wall, embedding shards of glass and metal into the plaster. Finn flinched, stopping his typing. The room fell into a terrifying silence. Luca stood, breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his chest heaving, the image of Emily, bound, hurt, helpless, burned behind his eyes. It was his nightmare made manifest. He had brought her into this world to protect her, and instead, he had handed her directly to the wolves. Then, just as quickly as the rage had come, it vanished, replaced by a cold, deadly clarity This was not the time for emotion. Emotion would get her killed. Strategy would bring her home. Track it, Lucas said. His voice was devoid of humanity. It sounded like a machine. I am already on it, Finn said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The metadata on the video file was scrubbed, but they made a mistake. In the background of the audio, you can hear a train whistle. The 11:15 freight to the shipyard. Luca identified instantly. Exactly, Finn said, bringing up a map of the city and the streetlights in the video. Look at the frequency of the flicker. They are the old sodium vapor lamps. The city replaced most of those last year, except in the industrial district near the old canning plants. Luca looked at the map, the shipyard, the canning plants, and right in the center of that radius was a derelict textile warehouse that the D'Angelo family had used for storage in the 90s. It is a trap, Finn warned, looking up at his boss. They want you to come. They know you will come. I know, Luca said. He walked to the gun safe built into the wall and punched in the code. He began to arm himself with methodical precision, a shoulder holster, a backup piece for his ankle, a knife sheathed at his belt. Call the crew, Luca ordered. We are not going in blind. We are going to burn it down around them. Emily woke up to the smell of rust and stale water. Her head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pain, and her mouth tasted like cotton. She tried to move her hands to rub her temple, but her wrists were arrested by something hard and biting. She opened her eyes. She was sitting in a wooden chair in the center of a cavernous room. The ceiling was lost in shadows, but moonlight filtered through high, broken windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Piles of rotting crates and rusted machinery littered the periphery. She tugged at her wrists, zip ties tight. Her ankles were bound to the chair legs. Panic flared, hot and bright, but Emily forced it down. She was an ER nurse. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Assess the situation. You are alive. You are conscious. Well, Marco D'Angelo's voice echoed through the warehouse. Sleeping Beauty finally joins us. Emily snapped her head up. Marco stepped out of the shadows. He was a handsome man in a serpentine way, dressed in a white suit that seemed aggressively clean in the filth of the warehouse. He held a lit cigarette, the cherry glowing in the gloom. Where is he? Emily demanded. Her voice was raspy, but she refused to let it tremble. He's on his way, Marco said, walking in a slow circle around her chair, like a moth to a flame or a dog to a whistle. It is pathetic. Really, Luca Moretti, the Iron Wolf, brought to his knees by a nurse with a savior complex. I am not his weakness, Emily spat. Oh, but you are, Marco smiled, stopping in front of her. He leaned down, blowing smoke near her face. Emily turned her head away, coughing. You are the only thing he cares about, which makes you the most dangerous weapon in my arsenal. You are a coward, Emily said, meeting his eyes. You cannot beat him in the streets, so you have to steal women to fight your battles for you. Marco's smile vanished. His eyes hardened. You think you know this world, little nurse? He asked softly. You think because you stitched up a few bullet holes, you understand what we do? I understand that you are small, Emily said. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she channeled every ounce of her anger into her voice. Luca wants to leave this life. He wants to build something. You just want to destroy. That is why you will lose. Marco laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He wants to leave? He told you that? He shook his head, looking at her with mock pity. Men like us do not leave. Emily, we die. And tonight, I am going to show you exactly what it costs when good people wander into bad stories. He checked his gold watch. He will be here in 10 minutes, Marco said. I have men on the catwalks. I have men at every door. When he walks in to save you, and he will, he's walking into a slaughter. You are not just a hostage. Emily, you are the bait in the trap. He turned and walked away, signaling to a guard in the shadows. Keep her quiet, Marco ordered. The guard stepped forward, a heavy strip of duct tape in his hand, 5 miles away. Luca stood in the center of his study for one final second of stillness. The house buzzed with activity. Finn was coordinating the strike team via secure comms. The engines of the SUVs were idling in the driveway. Luca looked at the desk. There, sitting on a coaster, was a coffee mug. It was white ceramic with a chip in the rim. It was the mug Emily had used that morning, the morning that felt like a lifetime ago. He reached out and picked it up. It was cold now. He traced the rim with his thumb. He thought of her laugh. He thought of the way she had looked at him in this very room, telling him that she chose him. He thought of the life he had dared to imagine, the quiet breakfasts, the burnt pasta, the freedom, and now Marco D'Angelo was going to take it all away. Luca pressed his lips to the cool ceramic rim, a silent, desperate kiss. It was a vow. "I would rather die beside you than live without trying to save you," he whispered to the empty room. He set the mug down. The clink of ceramic against wood sounded like a gavel falling. Luca turned and walked out of the study. The man who left the room was not the man who played the piano or read old novels. The man who left the room was the monster of Havenport, and he was coming for blood. The warehouse district was a graveyard of industry, silent and desolate. Luca's convoy approached with lights off, stopping 2 blocks away. "Status?" Luca asked into his earpiece. "Heat signatures confirmed." Finn's voice crackled. 12 hostiles inside, 3 on the roof. They are waiting for the front door to open. Then let's not disappoint them, Luca said. Team A, you are the distraction. Make it loud. Team B, with me. We take the side entrance. He looked at the men around him. They were his most loyal soldiers, men who had bled for him for a decade. No mistakes, Luca said. We get her out. That is the only mission. Roger that, boss. At Luca's signal, hell broke loose. Team A drove a reinforced SUV straight through the front bay doors of the warehouse. As the metal screeched and buckled, they deployed flashbangs and smoke grenades. The explosion of light and sound was deafening. Inside, Marco's men panicked. Gunfire erupted, erratic and wild, aimed at the smoking vehicle crashing through the entrance. Go, Luca hissed. He and his team breached the side door, moving like shadows. They wore gas masks to filter the smoke that was rapidly filling the cavernous space. Luca moved with a singular, terrifying focus. He dropped a guard with 2 silenced shots to the chest before the man could turn around. He stepped over the body, his eyes scanning the gloom. "Emily!" he shouted, his voice tearing through the chaos. "Emily!" Emily heard him. The warehouse had turned into a war zone. The air was thick with white smoke. The sound of automatic gunfire echoed off the metal walls, deafening and terrifying. She was alone in the center of the room. The guard who had been watching her had run toward the front entrance when the SUV crashed through. She heard her name. It was a roar, filled with desperation and fury. She tried to scream back, but the duct tape over her mouth stifled the sound into a muffled cry. She struggled against the zip ties, the plastic digging into her skin until she bled. He couldn't see her. The smoke was too thick. If he didn't find her, he would be caught in the crossfire. She had to make noise. She threw her weight to the side. The chair tipped. She crashed to the concrete floor hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. The pain was sharp, agonizing, but the sound of the heavy wooden chair hitting the floor echoed through the warehouse. She kicked her legs, slamming the chair against the ground again. Thud, thud. Luca heard it. A rhythmic thudding coming from the center of the floor, beneath the layer of smoke. "Hold fire," he ordered his team. He ran toward the sound, abandoning cover. Bullets whizzed past him, sparking against the machinery, but he didn't flinch. He saw the shape in the haze, a chair on its side, a woman struggling. Emily! He slid to his knees beside her, holstering his gun and pulling the knife from his belt. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror and relief. Her face was streaked with tears and dust. "I have you," he promised, his voice ragged. "I have you." He sliced through the zip ties on her wrists, then her ankles. He ripped the tape from her mouth gently. "Luca," she gasped, choking on the smoke. "It is a trap. Marco is—" "I know," Luca said. He pulled her into his arms. For 1 second, amidst the gunfire and the screaming and the smoke, the world narrowed down to just the 2 of them. He pressed his forehead against hers, his hand tangling in her hair, grounding himself. She was alive. She was warm. "We have to go," he said, pulling back. "Can you run?" "Yes." She nodded, scrambling to her feet. "Move!" Luca shouted into his comms. "Extraction, now!" He grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her toward the back exit where Finn was waiting with the second car. They sprinted through the labyrinth of crates, dodging debris. Just as they reached the heavy metal fire door, a shot rang out from above, louder and closer than the rest. A bullet struck the concrete inches from Emily's foot. Luca looked up. On the catwalk, 3 stories up, Marco D'Angelo stood looking down through the smoke. He was not panicked. He was smiling. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at Emily. "No," Luca screamed. He didn't calculate. He threw himself in front of her, shoving her toward the door with his body. The rifle cracked. Luca jerked violently as the bullet tore through his side. It felt like being hit with a sledgehammer. The breath left his lungs in a rush of agony. He stumbled, falling against the doorframe. "Luca!" Emily screamed, grabbing his arm. "Go!" He grunted, grit in his teeth. He forced himself upright, adrenaline flooding his system and drowning out the pain. He raised his own gun and fired 3 shots blindly toward the catwalk, forcing Marco to duck for cover. He shoved the door open. The cool night air hit them. Finn's car was idling 10 feet away, the back door open. "Get in!" Finn shouted, revving the engine. They dove into the back seat just as the warehouse door banged open behind them. Marco's men spilled out into the alleyway, opening fire. Bullets shattered the rear window of the sedan, showering them in safety glass. Emily screamed, covering her head. Luca threw his body over hers, shielding her from the rain of glass and lead. Finn slammed on the gas. The car screeched, tires smoking, and tore down the alleyway, fishtailing onto the main road. They sped away into the night, leaving the burning warehouse behind them, in the back seat. Luca slumped against the leather upholstery. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was returning with a vengeance. He pressed his hand to his side. His shirt was slick, wet, and dark. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, her voice trembling as she brushed the glass from her hair. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face in the passing streetlights. "I am fine," Luca lied, his voice tight, just a graze. But as he moved his hand, Emily saw the blood soaking through his fingers, pooling on the seat. It was too much blood for a graze. "You are not fine," she whispered, her nurse's training kicking in through the shock. "Just drive." "Finn," Luca rasped, his eyes fluttering shut. "Just drive." Part 6, the safe house, was a grim, forgotten apartment in the industrial district, peeling wallpaper and dust motes dancing in the beams of streetlights that filtered through the boarded windows. Finn kicked the door open, practically carrying Luca inside. Luca's legs gave out the moment they crossed the threshold. He collapsed onto the threadbare rug, a groan of agony tearing from his throat. The blood from his side had soaked through his shirt, turning the white fabric into a heavy, dark crimson map of their escape. "Get him on the table," Emily shouted, her voice cracking but authoritative. Finn grabbed Luca's shoulders, and together they hoisted him onto the sturdy kitchen table. Emily scrambled to find supplies. There was a first aid kit under the sink. Basic, insufficient, but it would have to do. She ripped it open, her hands shaking so violently she dropped the roll of gauze. "Focus," she commanded herself. "You are an ER nurse. He's just a patient." But he was not just a patient, he was Luca. Finn was pacing the small room, running his hands through his hair. Furious. "We walked right into it. I should have known. I should have checked the perimeter twice." "This is on me. Stop pacing and hold the light," Emily ordered, ripping Luca's shirt open. The buttons scattered across the floor. The wound was ugly, a jagged tear along his ribs where the bullet had plowed through muscle. It was bleeding sluggishly but heavily. He was losing volume fast. Luca's skin was gray, clammy to the touch. His eyes were half open, glazed and unfocused. "Emily," he murmured, the name slurring on his tongue. "You have to go." "Leave me, shut up," Emily said, pressing a wad of gauze into the wound. She leaned her entire body weight onto his chest to apply pressure. "It is not safe," Luca gasped, wincing as the pain spiked. "Loving me." "It put a target on your back. I did this. I ruined you." Emily felt tears hot and stinging on her cheeks, mixing with the sweat and grime of the warehouse. Her hands were stained red with his blood. It was everywhere, on her scrubs, on her arms, under her fingernails. "You did not ruin me," she choked out. "Swapping the soaked gauze for fresh pads, you saved me. And now I am saving you. So you do not get to quit. Do you hear me, Luca Moretti? You do not get to quit on me." Luca's head rolled to the side. His breathing was shallow. The fight was draining out of him with every drop of blood. "I cannot protect you anymore," he whispered. Emily stopped. She looked at his face. Seeing the resignation settling in his dark eyes, he was preparing to die. He was letting go because he thought his death would buy her freedom. She grabbed his face with both hands, smearing blood on his jawline, forcing him to look at her. "If you die, I will follow," she whispered fiercely. Luca's eyes widened slightly, clearing for a fraction of a second. "I mean it," Emily sobbed, her voice raw. "I do not know how to live without you. If you leave me in this world alone, after everything we have seen, I will not make it. I will not survive the grief." Something in Luca's expression shattered. The resignation vanished, replaced by a desperate, terrifying intensity. He forced his eyes open. He lifted a trembling hand, his fingers cupping the back of her neck, tangling in her hair. He pulled her down. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce, shaky, and tasted of iron and salt. It was a collision of two souls dangling over the abyss. Luca kissed her like he was trying to breathe his own life into her lungs, or perhaps steal hers to keep himself tethered to the earth. It was a goodbye and a refusal all at once. When they broke apart, their foreheads rested against each other. Luca was gasping for air, but the fire was back in his eyes. "Then we will live instead," he rasped. He gripped her neck harder, his thumb stroking the pulse that hammered beneath her skin. "You hear me? Emily?" he said, his voice gaining a jagged edge of strength. "We live together. I am not leaving you behind." He tried to sit up, groaning through his teeth. "Don't move," Emily cried, trying to push him back. "Help me up." "Finn," Luca ordered, ignoring her. "Boss, you have lost a pint of blood," Finn argued, though he stopped pacing. "Marco is not going to stop," Luca said, gritting his teeth as he swung his legs off the table. "He knows I am wounded. He knows he missed the kill shot. He will tear this city apart tonight to find us. If we hide, we die in a corner. So what do we do?" Finn asked. "We end it," Luca said. "Tonight." He looked at Emily. He reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "We give him what he wants," Luca said, "proof of victory." The plan was born of desperation and an intimate knowledge of Marco D'Angelo's greatest weakness, his pride. Within the hour, a message was passed through the city's underground. It was a whisper, a rumor fed to a known snitch who was on Marco's payroll. The message was simple. Luca Moretti was dying. He had been hit bad. His men had panicked and scattered. He was alone, bleeding out at the old Pier 19, waiting for the end. It was an invitation Marco could not resist. He did not just want Luca dead, he wanted to see the light go out. He wanted to stand over the king of Havenport and watch him fall. By 3 a.m, the fog had rolled into the harbor. Thick and cold, it smelled of brine and diesel fuel. Pier 19 was a desolate stretch of rotting wood and rusted iron, jutting out into the black water. Luca stood at the end of the pier. He was leaning heavily against a wooden pylon, his jacket buttoned tight to hide the bandages Emily had wrapped around his ribs. He looked like a ghost. He looked like a man on his last legs, and he was not alone. Emily stood beside him. Finn had begged her to stay in the car, to stay safe, but she had refused. "If we live together," she had said. "Now." She stood shoulder to shoulder with the man she loved, her hand laced firmly in his. She was the anchor keeping him upright. They waited. The sound of engines cut through the fog. Headlights swept across the pier, blindingly bright. 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop 50 yards away. Doors slammed. Footsteps echoed on the wood. Marco D'Angelo emerged from the mist, flanked by 6 of his best soldiers. He walked with a swagger, a man who believed he had already won. He stopped 10 paces away, his silhouette framed by the headlights. "Look at this!" Marco laughed, spreading his arms. "The great Luca Moretti, propped up by a nurse. You look pale." "Luca." Luca lifted his head. It took effort. The pain was a constant, screaming noise in his head, but he pushed it down. "You are sloppy, Marco," Luca said, his voice carrying over the water. "You missed." "I won't miss this time," Marco sneered. He pulled a heavy pistol from his coat. "I admit, I am impressed you came out here to die in the open. It is almost poetic. I did not come here to die," Luca said softly. Marco raised an eyebrow. "No? Then why are you here? To beg? To offer you a chance to walk away?" Luca lied. "This ends tonight, Marco. Surrender and you live." Marco threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "Surrender? You are the one bleeding on a dock. You have nothing, Luca. Your men are gone. Your warehouse is ash, and your queen—" He pointed the gun at Emily. "I think I will take her with me," Marco said. "She will make a nice trophy." Luca's hand tightened on Emily's. He felt her tremble, not with fear, but with adrenaline. "Do not touch her," Luca warned. Marco cocked the hammer of his gun. "Kill him," Marco ordered his men, "but leave the girl alive." His men raised their weapons. "Now!" Luca shouted. The command echoed across the water. From the shadows of the shipping containers stacked nearby, muzzle flashes lit up the fog. Finn and the remnants of the Moretti crew had not scattered. They had been waiting, dug in like ticks. The first volley was precise. 3 of Marco's men dropped instantly, incapacitated by shots to the legs and shoulders. "Take cover!" Marco screamed, diving behind a rusted winch. Luca grabbed Emily, pulling her down behind the thick wooden pylon. Bullets chewed into the wood above their heads, sending splinters raining down on them. "Stay low!" Emily yelled, checking Luca's side. The exertion had reopened the wound. Fresh blood was staining his jacket. "I am okay." Luca grunted, drawing his own weapon. The pier erupted into chaos. It was a controlled burst of violence, a surgical strike designed by Finn to neutralize, not massacre. The Moretti men moved with discipline. Flanking the D'Angelo crew, Emily used her knowledge of anatomy to guide Luca. "Move left," she shouted over the gunfire. "That angle is blind." They scrambled to the next cover, moving closer to where Finn was pinning Marco down. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the darkness behind Marco's position. It was Rafe Lombardi. "Rafe!" Marco shouted, seeing his backup. "Flank them! Kill them all!" Rafe raised his weapon. He aimed it directly at Luca and Emily. Emily froze. This was the traitor. This was the end. But Rafe did not fire. Instead, he shifted his aim 45 degrees to the right. "Drop it." "Marco," Rafe said calmly. Marco spun around, eyes wide with shock. "Rafe, what are you doing?" "I made a deal," Rafe said. "Finn offered me a way out. No prison time. Witness protection. All I had to do was hand you over." "You rat!" Marco screamed, raising his gun to shoot Rafe. Rafe fired first, a single shot that struck Marco's hand. Marco howled, dropping his pistol as it skittered across the dock and fell into the dark water below. Finn emerged from the shadows, kicking Marco to the ground and pressing the barrel of a shotgun to the back of his head. "It is over, Marco," Finn said. Silence fell over the pier, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the lap of the water against the wood. Luca stood up slowly, leaning heavily on Emily. They walked over to where Marco lay defeated. Marco looked up, his face twisted in hate. "Do it," he spat. "Finish it, Luca. Be the monster everyone says you are." Luca looked down at him. He looked at the blood on his own hands. He looked at Emily, whose face was pale but fierce. He raised his gun, aiming it between Marco's eyes. Emily held her breath. She did not look away, for a long moment. Luca held the pose of the executioner. Then slowly, he lowered the weapon. "No," Luca said. He stepped back, holstering the gun. "I am done being a monster," he said quietly, "and I am done with you." Marco stared at him, confused. "You are letting me live?" "I am letting the law handle you," Luca said. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to grow louder. Finn had made the call 10 minutes ago. "You are a fool!" Marco screamed as Finn zip-tied his hands. "You cannot work with the police. You are the Moretti Don." "Not anymore," Luca whispered. He turned to Emily. He looked exhausted, broken, and completely free. "Is it true?" she asked. "Yes," Luca said. "I made a deal, too. Testimony in exchange for a plea. I dismantle the syndicate. I give them everything. And in exchange... In exchange, Emily asked. I get a life, he said, eventually. The police cruisers burst onto the pier, lights flashing blue and red in the fog. Officers swarmed the scene, shouting commands. Luca raised his hands. He looked at Emily one last time before they separated him from her. Wait for me, he said. I will follow, she reminded him, echoing her promise. The months that followed were a blur of courtrooms, depositions, and headlines. The trial of the century. The papers called it. The fall of the D'Angelo syndicate and the dismantling of the Moretti empire. Luca kept his word. He gave them everything. Names, dates, account. He burned his own kingdom to the ground to ensure that no one could ever rise from the ashes to threaten her again. In exchange, the judge showed leniency. Not freedom, but mercy. The minimum security facility was a 2-hour drive from Havenport. It was a quiet place, surrounded by pine trees and high fences. Emily visited every Sunday. They sat at a metal table in the visitation room. There was no glass between them here, just a strict no-touching rule that they stretched to the limit by holding hands across the surface. You look tired, Luca said, running his thumb over her knuckles. Double shifts. Emily smiled. We are short-staffed again. You should rest, Luca chided gently. I rest when I'm here, she said. They talked about small things, the weather, the books he was reading from the prison library, the cat. They never talked about the past. They only talked about the future. 2 years, Luca said, looking at their joined hands. With good behavior. I can wait 2 years. Emily said, I waited my whole life for you. 2 years is nothing. The day he was released, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Emily waited by the gate in her rusted Honda Civic when the heavy metal door buzzed open and Luca walked out. She felt her heart stop. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans that the state had provided. He carried a small duffel bag. He looked different. The sharpness was gone, replaced by a quiet calm. He looked younger. He saw her car. He stopped. He dropped the bag. Emily didn't wait. She ran to him. He caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around. She buried her face in his neck, smelling soap and freedom. I am here, he whispered into her hair. I am here. Let's go home, Emily said. Home was not a mansion with gates and guards. Home was a 4th-floor walk-up in a city 3 states away, where nobody knew the name Moretti. It was a small apartment with creaky floorboards and a balcony that overlooked the city lights. 6 months after his release, the smell of burnt garlic filled the tiny kitchen. Damn it! Luca laughed, scraping the blackened pasta into the trash. I think I have lost my touch. You never had a touch, Emily teased, leaning against the counter with a glass of cheap wine. You had a personal chef. Luca grinned. He looked happy. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but the shadows inside them were gone. Pizza, he suggested. Pizza, Emily agreed. They ordered takeout and curled up on the second-hand beige couch that they had bought at a flea market. The balcony door was open, letting in the cool evening breeze. Later, they stood on the balcony, looking out at the grid of lights below. It was a different city, a different life. Emily leaned her head against Luca's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. Do you remember? She asked softly. In the warehouse? I try not to, Luca said. I told you that if you died, I would follow, she said. I really meant it. Luca. Luca turned her to face him. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch rough and warm and alive. I know you did, he said. That is why I fought. That is why I am standing here. He kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and lingering, with the promise of 1,000 tomorrows. We chose to live instead, Luca whispered against her lips, and I am not wasting a second of it. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Luca and Emily. It has been a journey of danger, redemption, and love that conquered the darkest of odds. I hope you enjoyed this Mafia romance story. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below telling me your country or city. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of passion and intrigue. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending. Did Luca make the right choice? Until next time, keep reading.